Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to this this panel, collaborating with Philip José Farmer. And I'd also like to put out there our heartfelt thanks to all the people at PulpFest for having us here again this year. It's great to be here, and thank you. I'm going to start off with some introductions before we jump into some questions and exploring a bit more about collaborating with Phil Farmer. On my left, and apologies, tell me if I start wandering from the mic. On my left I have Christopher Paul Carey, professional editor, who collaborated with Phil on Song of KWASIN and has continued in that vein, and we're going to hear a little bit more from Chris around that collaboration. Next to Chris we have Wyn, a writer of many great pulp stories and a well-known farmer scholar who co-wrote the EVIL in Pemberelely House with Phil in 2009. And then further along the line we have Danny Adams. Danny is Phil's great-nephew. Danny collaborated with Phil on the City Beyond play in 2007 and has completed a DAYWORLD novel called A Hole in Wednesday, which is debuting here at PulpFest, FarmerCon, and it's available in the dealer's room. And I suppose I should introduce myself as well. Last, if not, well, very least, and you probably can tell at least because I'm the only one without a little introductory sheet in front of you. So Paul Spiteri, as you can probably tell, I'm from the UK, so I've managed to engineer my own little Brexit for a couple of weeks. But it feels a little bit out of the frying pan into the fire with everything that's going on here politically as well. But the reason I'm here is that I collaborated with Phil a few years ago on a short story, getting ready to write, and hopefully I'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go through. Okay. I'd like to start by asking our friends on the panel just about how they came to Phil, just what drew them to Phil's writing, and perhaps talk about the first time they met Phil and what that meant to them. Chris, do you want to?
Sure. Can you hear me with this mic here? What drew me to Phil, originally I was as a young lad, was a huge Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. So what drew me to Phil was seeing Tarzan alive in the ancient Opar books, Hado and Ancient Opar and Flight to Opar on the bookshelves, and I snatched them up right away when I saw them. I was still reading, I think I was about halfway through the Tarzan series, was somewhere in the age of 12 to 13-year-old. And so it was that Burroughs connection, really. And I kind of saw that Phil was doing, in a way, what Burroughs himself did, because Burroughs connected a lot of his worlds together. And Phil, of course, took other people's worlds and drew them together. So this metafictional universe that he was creating. So, you want me to go into how I met?
Yeah, interesting.
I had written a number of articles on Phil in fanzines, primarily the Bronze Gazette, the Doc Savage fanzine. And I had sent him one of them that I had written to get his feedback on it. He wouldn't confirm or deny decry my theory that I had in it, but he wrote me a letter back that was very, very positive and encouraging. And so about a year after that, I saw on Mike Croteau's Farmer website, which at that time I think was the unofficial Philip José Farmer website, that Phil was going to be appearing in Peoria, Peoria Public Library. And so I was living in eastern Pennsylvania at the time, and I rented a car and drove out to meet him. And I kind of took a little tour of the library. I got there early in the day, met the librarian who was doing the PR for the library and set up the exhibit. They had a little room set up based around Farmer. And so she introduced me to Phil when he came in before his talk that he was giving. And she introduced me, and he was like, "Oh, you're that guy." Because my theory was, you have to know my theory. It was a kind of a controversial theory in my article, and then it really put me off. I'm like, "Oh no, he thinks I'm a nutcase or something, And then he thrust his hand out and gave me a big smile, and he was a big trickster, so he was just trying to give me a hard time.
And I guess if you want to know that story, you're going to have to get Chris at the Meet Your House stand sometime tomorrow. I'm sure you'll give the full detail. Cool. Wynn, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I came to Phil's books very fortuitously. My family and I had been on a family vacation. I lived in Colorado as a young boy, and we were on a family vacation to Washington D.C. And it came time for a road trip back home. This is summer of 1975, and so I was 8. And the family friend, as a gift, gave me a whole stack of the Bantam Doc Savage paperbacks to read in the car on the way home, as well as Phil's biography, Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life. It was the Bantam paperback edition as well. I still own that. I have it in a safe somewhere, secret location. And so that was imprinted on my brain. I read all of those books in the back of the car on this hot summer days driving back home to Colorado, as well as the Doc Savage bio. And so for me, my experience and how I absorbed Doc Savage, the character, into my psyche and became a fan of Doc Savage is just, it's inexorably tied to Philip José Farmer and Phil's ideas about Doc. And I know that many other fans' experience about Doc are different from that, right? And don't necessarily accept or buy into maybe all of Phil's theories about Doc, which is absolutely fine, right? But from my personal experience, that they're just tied together, and there's really no way for me to separate that. And so that was the first Phil Farmer book that I read, and I was just entranced by his family tree, and it opened up a whole new vista of other books that I wanted to read. Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, the Burroughs books that were mentioned in connection, and the Fu Manchu books, and like, who are these great characters? And it made me seek out all these other great characters. The next Phil Farmer book that I read, I was also very much into a lot of the Del Rey paperbacks that were coming out in the mid to late 70s, and those great covers by Darrell K. Sweet, and I was into the time travel books too. So Time's Last Gift by Philip José Farmer came out in '77, and I read it and I loved it, and I had no idea at all, no clue that he had done his little literary trick, and that I had just read a Wold Newton novel, right? I had no idea until much later that he had inserted Wold Newtonry into that book. And so that's how I came to Phil.
Do you want to just tell us how you met Phil?
Yeah. Sure. So my interest in Phil's work and in his Wold Newton mythos continued, and in 1997 I put up a fan website about Wold Newton, and it was pretty rudimentary from a technical perspective, and if you go out and look at it now, you can see that is still the case. But it was fun, and it attracted a certain fan following, and by the time several years later had rolled around, I think it was summer 2005, I received sort of a panicked, sort of / hopeful, maybe yes, but if you think I'm crazy, then forget about it, email from Michael Croteau of the unofficial Philip José Farmer fan page, unofficial at that time, saying about a week out, you want to come visit Phil and Betty for 4th of July? And looked at my wife and said, yes, I'm going to see Phil. I'm going to go meet Philip José Farmer for the first time. And it was a wonderful experience. Flew to Peoria from Denver, and got to meet Phil and Betty, and they invited me to stay in their house and stay overnight. They were just so warm, so giving. They'd never met me before in person, and they were just lovely, lovely people. And that was a really exciting trip for me. It was really, the excitement was really twofold. One was I was invited to go down into the basement archives with Mike as he was searching for new material for the fanzine Farmer File. And we discovered the manuscript, unfinished manuscript for what eventually became the EVIL in Pembereley House. So very first trip to Phil Farmer's house, discover a manuscript, and then eventually was able to go on and complete it. The other bit of excitement was setting off their house alarm at 2 a.m.
You can gloss over that bit. Yeah. Danny?
Well, technically, I had always known him. I first met him literally when I was 5 years old, but I became aware of him as a writer when I was 11, when my mom put out her collection of the Riverworld novels on our bookshelf. And so I looked at them, I said, wait, isn't that our uncle? Yeah. So I read them, at least I read To Your Scattered Bodies Go at the age of 11, and the next time my mom was on the phone with him, I started asking her to ask him all these questions I had, excited questions about the book, which he even more enthusiastically answered. And in fact, a few days later, I discovered that he'd gotten he was so happy about me asking these questions and being so enthusiastic about his books that he sent me a package of his books that he sent. The first 4 Riverworld novels, Great Heart Silver, Mad Goblin, Time's Last Gift, which became the first one after Riverworld that I read. And I'd also just started hitting puberty, so reading Philip José Farmer for the first time as I was having my first waves of puberty had a lot of interesting results that I'm not going to go into here. But I finally got to see him again the year after that. And my family and I stayed with him for 2 weeks. And though just because we were staying there, he couldn't take 2 weeks off from writing. He was working on a novel, though. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly which one. This would have been the summer of 1983. And so I asked if I could watch him write. And he didn't want me to watch him write, but he said, all right, if you just stay back, I'll only backtrack a little bit. He had a huge basement room filled with books, and this long desk that ran across the wall. It's in a couple of biographical pictures of him, but a long desk that ran across 2 walls, and that's where he did his writing. And right around the staircase was the basement. There were the basement steps that went up to the main part of the house. And he said, well, if you just stay back there, don't bother me, and it'll be fine. You know, I wasn't insulted by this. I was already aware that, oh, he just doesn't like to be interrupted while he's writing because this must be some sort of magical process, and I don't want to interrupt anything because then it might break the spell. So I would sit for sometimes an hour at a time on these basement steps just listening to him type. And it slowly occurred to me, oh, he goes down there every morning by 9, he writes till lunch, he takes an hour for lunch, and he comes back down and he writes again till 4 or 5 in the evening, just like a job. And that was the first realization that I had where, yes, you can be inspired as a writer, but still treat it like a day job. And that followed with the revelation, oh, if you treat it like a day job and you do it every day, then the inspiration will come. You don't need to just sit there and wait for it to drop out of the sky. And I had done a little bit of writing on my own, mostly short stories, when I was a kid, but by that point I had been doing cartoons. That's what I thought I wanted to do. For something like since the age of 9, I've been doing cartoons, but from that trip on, I decided, no, writing is what I want to do, writing books, and doing it in a disciplined way where even if I couldn't write every day, which I couldn't since I was in school, but even if it was just 1 day a week, I'd say, all right, this 1 day a week, I'm going to sit down for 3 hours and write. I wrote my first book that summer after we got back from Peoria, and really haven't stopped for any significant amount of time since then.
Thank you, Danny. And because I'm MC, I can ask myself that question, so thank you, Paul. You're welcome, Paul. I first met Phil in 2001. I've been reading Phil Farmer probably since 12 or 13, age of 12 or 13. I think I started with Dark is the Sun and then the Riverworld series. I guess a couple of years before 2001, I'd become friends with Tracy Knight, a great author who I hope will write a lot more in the years to come. And we kind of agreed that we'd hook up. I'd flown over from the UK and caught up with Tracy and his wife Sharon, And Phil knew we were here, and Tracy had been talking to him, and they actually, Phil and Betty, invited us, my family, over to their 60th wedding anniversary in Peoria. So my first meeting of Phil was rocking up to his door, a small, well, not so small, but a family party gathering for his 60th wedding anniversary, and even just getting to there was a bit of a tale, which I won't go into now, but it was a lot of fun just getting to that point. And you know, they say you shouldn't meet your heroes. Well, you know, that was just a fantastic evening and the start of a friendship with Phil and Betty that, you know, lasted the rest of their lives and will live in my life for the rest of mine, and I'll always treasure. I want to now talk a little bit about your first collaboration. Could I start with you, Chris, and ask you to talk a little bit about Corcasa and how you got involved in that and how that's evolved?
So eventually, through my friendship with Mike, came to be one of the editors, along with Paul, actually, on Farmer Files, a magazine of Philip José Farmer. And that was a kind of sort of bridge semi-prozine / fanzine. Everybody did it for free, but you know, it cost money to subscribe to Farmer File. And so we were looking for new material to publish by Philip José Farmer from his files. So it was actually the trip that Mike and Wynn took to look through the files for more material that we could publish in Farmer File when they uncovered the manuscript, partial manuscript in outline to the Song of Kwasin, which at that time was titled Kwasin of Opar, which was a title that Phil was not really pleased with because the main character, Kwasin, is not actually from Opar. So Mike sent me an email that was a tally of the things that they had found, including people in Pembereley House, and kind of a bullet points of what we could do with each one if it was something that would really fit in Farmer File or whatever. And Mike had written, you know, outline to the song to Kwasin of Opar, and he said, not really sure what we could do with this, you know. Maybe we could sell copies of the manuscript for on behalf of Phil and Betty. And I was like, you have the third ancient Opar, the story of the third ancient Opar novel. So I was like, send it to me now. and I got it, and you snail mailed it to me, Mike, and the night that I got it, I got home from work and went out to the Science Fiction Museum. I live out in Seattle, Washington, and I was going to see a science fiction writer give a talk. And I brought that along with me, and I got there early, and I sat and I read the outline to the third Opar book, and it just blew my mind, because there it was, the whole Civil War with King Nimrud played out in full, this grand epic novel, and I don't think I listened to a word that science fiction author said that night, because I was off in another land.
Do you even remember who it was?
I do, but I don't want to offend the person by saying I didn't listen to what he said. It was a very, very famous award-winning science fiction author. So I, you know, kind of audaciously wrote to Mike, as like, this needs to be finished. And Phil at that time had retired from writing. He wasn't going to be writing anymore. So I wrote a pitch letter. This is how I would do it. These are my qualifications. And Phil knew me from the articles I had written on his work, and I think he kind of enjoyed the take that I took on analyzing his work and all. So I think that's probably a contributing factor.
Thanks, Chris. And Wynn, do you want to tell us the story behind Pembereley House?
Sure. So by the time I had made my initial trip to Peoria in 2005, my first book collecting Philip José Farmer related material, Myths for the Modern Age, was being put into production and was on its way to coming out. So Phil knew me from that perspective, as well as the website.
Yeah.
And having discovered the manuscript and having read the first couple of chapters, I mean, it became very clear to me that that this was a book that Phil intended to be about Doc's daughter in the 1970s and kind of her initial adventure, and he had tied it together very clearly with other elements that he incorporated into the Wold Newton mythos, including Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, deep ties to the Sherlockian canon, as well as the Doc Savage books, of course. And so that kind of ticked all the boxes for me, and in particular, I was able to get a lot of assistance from my wife on the Jane Austen side of things, and she helped me get up to speed on all things Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen, and kind of, come at it from that perspective. And so kind of sat on it for a little while and saw how things were proceeding with Chris first. So Chris was definitely, kind of the trailblazer from that perspective. Actually, I would say Danny was the trailblazer, and so you can tell that story. But in terms of sort of creating a pitch and an outline and how I would present it and finish it, I think within a couple of years I had gotten permission from Phil to start writing it. And complete it based on his outline. There were areas of his outline that needed completing or fleshing out, a little bit more layering in of details in some areas as well too. It was interesting because there were elements of the book from a fake genealogical or fictional genealogy perspective that didn't quite line up with his Wold Newton genealogies as had been published in his two biographies, Tarzan Alive and the Doc Savage biography. And so I did have to make a couple of changes in his original work there, with his permission and buy-in and understanding, of course. And actually created, I think one of my fondest memories is creating a graphic family tree, much like the graphic family trees in front of the two bios, and whipping it up on my computer and printing it out and showing it to him at FarmerCon 2007. And his eyes lit up, and Phil sat and he just pored over that and studied it, I think for hours. And that was a real thrill for me. I think that was probably my highlight thrill for the whole process.
Excellent. I remember that. Danny, do you want to tell us a little bit about City Beyond Play?
Well, I may have hacked out the road for the first time, but Mike Croteau gave me the axe to do it, in that he offered up several of Phil Farmer's unfinished manuscripts for sale on pjfarmer.com. And the idea was, whatever material there is, you get a copy of the manuscript, you get a copy of notes, copy of the outline if he did any of that, and the money, of course, would go to the farmers. And when I first discovered this, I realized there was one that just grabbed me, one of these unfinished manuscripts just grabbed me, that I had to know how it ended, called The City Beyond Play, which was a story of a murderer who enters this land where everybody is a medieval reenactor 24/7. They never leave their roles. They have robotic dragons. They have castles. And he thinks this is a great place. Well, first he thinks this is a great place to take sanctuary, and then he realizes, oh, this is a great place where I can work my way up or fight my way up to the top. A very egalitarian society in that regard. I had done medieval reenacting. I learned archery through the Society for Creative Anachronism, so this kind of grabbed me by the lapels. But when my wife suggested, I talked about wanting to finish it myself, but I didn't have the nerve to ask. And my wife finally, metaphorically, grabbed me by the lapels and said, ask him. So I did, and in that case, I was going to Peoria for the 50th anniversary celebration of his story, The Lovers, where I first met a lot of the Farmer File guys, too. And I asked him, but I didn't want to just go in and ask based on family ties. At that point, I had been writing a novel. I think I was about 8 chapters into it. And I wanted to show him that I had the chops to do it, so I used this unfinished science fiction novel, an alternate history set in ancient Rome, so he could see what my writing style was like, that I could actually do something and finish what I started. Because I can't even understand my mental process now about this, but I hadn't tried yet seriously to publish, so I only had a handful of things out there, mostly poetry. So I showed him the book, he read through it, and he finally said, all right, you can write the book on one condition. And I said, what's that? You have to finish your own book first. Well, it seemed like a simple enough proposition at the time, but the book ended up taking me another 2 years to finish. So, and then after that, I thought, how can I finish a Philip José Farmer novel? I'm still nowhere near that good. So I hesitated, and finally, a few months of hesitation later, I was working on something else and was just struck literally in mid-sentence with, you need to finish The City Beyond Play or you're never going to do it. And I don't know if this, I wouldn't say this is something supernatural. It's probably just my subconscious saying, hey, if you don't do this now, I know you well enough to know it's never going to get done. So I dropped the book that I was working on then. I started working on The City Beyond Play. It only took a couple and a half weeks because after all that time that I'd spent thinking about it, and he had very complete notes and an outline, finished it in 2.5 weeks. He was able to see at that point all the chapters. I sent them on to him and Betty Farmer. They both read them, would comment, but they didn't change anything substantial, just little comments here and there. And eventually it came out, but one of the strange things about that feeling of you need to finish this is a few months later he had a major stroke, and a stroke that damaged his brain and his eyesight. So had I waited a few months, he wouldn't have been able to read anything at all because the eyesight wouldn't let him focus for very long, and he had a mental fog thanks to the stroke that wouldn't let him concentrate for even as much as a page at a time. So I got it just under the wire, and book came out 2 years later, 2007, and when he was still alive. He could only read it in tiny snatches at a time, but it was the first time that I was able to fulfill a lifelong writing dream of, you have sent all of these books to me that you signed for me, and now this is the first book I get to sign for you and send it along.
Brilliant, thank you. And for my own part, the process of me getting ready to write, was that in 2006 I'd edited Pearls from Peoria, and during that process I'd spent quite a bit of time with Phil, a couple of visits over to the States, many phone calls, and our conversations around that collection. Some of those comments made it into some of the introductory comments that go along with the stories, and that was a really good, fulfilling, fun process. And a couple of years later, Mike, when he found an unfinished fragment, the story that became Getting Ready to Write, and had spoken to Phil and Betty about getting that completed, and then he'd asked me if I'd like to do that, and I just thought I'd love to go back and just redo that process of working with Phil. At that point it was mostly by phone. I wasn't due to come over or anything, but we had a number of phone conversations about where that was going to go, and I read it out to him over the phone, and Betty read bits of it out to him. So just completing that was harked back for me to having worked on Pearls, and it was just, I think we all would agree, a very fulfilling experience to be able to work with somebody like Phil. Okay, I want to move on to the next question. Could we talk about where that has led you to now? So, Chris, we've got Blood of Ancient Opar out this year now. Do you want to talk about what has led to that process?
Sure. So, essentially, Meteor House started putting out these World of Philip José Farmer volumes that were anthologies, but along with that, they decided to basically get licensed tie-in fiction with Farmer's works. And the first one that I wrote, and it was the first one that Meteor House published, was a book called Exiles of Co. It's a novella, and this was a prequel story it's set 800 years before the first Ancient Opar novel. So that I wrote, and that was entirely my own. I mean, it was a different experience because I had total control over that writing the plot and the characters, with the exception of it was Phil's world building. And certainly working within the parameters of his world. And that kind of led to other projects that came down the pipes. Hot on King of Opar came out last year. Blood of Ancient Opar came out this year. They're really together are a longer work, a single novel basically, and they are based on a fragment from in the middle of one of Phil's 2 Flight to Opar outlines. It's his earlier one. He stopped and tried to work out the ending of the novel, he needed to figure certain things out to be able to finish the climax of the novel. So he stops the outline of Flight to Opar and then writes like outline of future relationships. And he had to work out certain details of what was going to happen when he was planning for in the future of the series in order to work out the ending for the novel Flight to Opar. And in that, he basically outlined the essence of what would have been the skeleton of what would have been the fourth novel. And so Hadon, King of Opar, and Blood of Ancient Opar together are that fourth novel based on a skeleton idea. So I have the main thrust of the plot, the climax, certain things that happen to major characters. That's all Phil. So
I just think it's fantastic the way that that initial collaboration has led to this new fiction. It's great. Danny, do you want to talk a little bit around A Hole in Wednesday?
Right, A Hole in Wednesday was another long process, though not because of any hesitation on mine. But in August of 2013, 2013, Mike Croteau called me and he said, "We have this new DAYWORLD manuscript. Would you be interested in finishing it?" And I think he was going to tell me what it was about, but I didn't give him a chance to. I just said yes, and I didn't care what it was about. Just him saying DAYWORLD was all I needed to know. But then we spent almost the next 2 years waiting to get the rights to it. And so in the meantime, Mike had me do up an outline and a 10-page treatment about what I wanted to do to finish it. It wasn't notes outlined. There was nothing anywhere nearly as thorough with that as there had been for The City Beyond Play. So I had to go based on signs, indications, trends in the manuscript that Phil Farmer had already written. And then I waited and waited, and we waited and waited. Finally, as it happened, I was visiting Paul in London. First night in, he takes me on a nighttime walk around the city, and we get back to his house, and he said, "Oh, by the way, Mike told me this morning you've got the rights back to A Hole in Wednesday, and you can write it." So I said, "Oh, awesome, I'll finish it by Christmas," which I did, albeit just barely.
And didn't I say something like, "Well, you've got 2 weeks now"?
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't going to do this one in 2.5 weeks, but I did finish it by December, and it is out on the dealer table now. And it was kind of an odd feeling, having written one book while he was still alive. That was a collaboration with him to do it now while he was gone. But it was like the 3 months that I spent writing it were like being with him again for 3 months. And the book itself was just a whole lot of fun to do. So I would have passed it up anyway, but there was no way I would have passed it up once I realized that was going to be the case.
Great. And obviously now we've heard from Chris around a collaboration that's led to some new original work, and Danny's talked about a book that's come out now. When do you want to talk a little bit around what future collaboration might be and look like?
Sure. In the intervening time since Pembereley House, there was just a couple of things that kind of flow into that. I've done a second Pat Wildman book, so the sequel to Pembereley House, although that one was completely my own work, similar to Chris's Exiles of Co., right? Set in the same world, Phil's world building, but a plot and a story that didn't come from Phil. And I do intend to do more of those after a couple of other projects. And I also did a series of shorts, which I call Wold Newton Origins, which really tied back to, let's tell a little bit more about the actual story of the Wold Newton meteor coming down in 1795 and irradiating some of the folks who were there, kind of led to the Wold Newton family, and adding to the mythos that way. And in one of those stories, I actually connected, did a crossover, a farmer to farmer crossover, if you will, with the Wold Newton series and with Phil's Secrets of the Nine, or the Lord Grunneth Doc Caliban series, which I think actually takes place in a parallel universe. And so I kind of did a cross-universal crossover there. Again, as part of Meteor House's licensed farmer fiction. A couple of years ago, in 2012 and 13, I had the opportunity to work on a series of books that Titan Books was doing, that they had the rights to do, to reprint some of Farmer's works. And 3 of those were the Secrets of the Nine series, which were A Feast Unknown, Lord of the Trees, and The Mad Goblin. And if you're familiar with these are Phil's alternate versions of Tarzan and Doc Savage, but done in his own Farmerian way, as Lord Grunneth and Doc Caliban. And had the opportunity to kind of really clean up those manuscripts, edit out any previous typos, inconsistencies, and so on, and really kind of delve into that mythos. And as part of that, really invigorated my interest in finishing the fourth book, which was The Monster on Hold, which was announced in 1983, and then for reasons we really don't know, I don't think we have the full story behind, never completed by Phil. So this was intended to be a fourth book in the series, centered around Doc Caliban. And the interesting challenge behind this book would be very different from the Pembereley House collaboration, where there were several, I won't say how many, but a good deal of prose written by Phil, several chapters, and then a pretty solid outline. But completely unknown, right? I mean, it had never been announced to the world. That book had not been announced at all. We found it in the files. It was a complete surprise to us as Farmer fans. This will be different. The Monster on Hold, Farmer fandom well knows about this book and is well acquainted with the existent prose. It was published in the 1983 World Fantasy Convention booklet. It's been republished several times. And so I can guarantee you I won't be changing one of those words. Those words will stay solid. We did discover another fragment in Phil's files, which was previously unknown, and so I'll be weaving that into the manuscript as well. But what we don't have is an outline, kind of detailing exactly what Phil intended to do with this story from a plot perspective. Do have notes.
Although there's a sort of partial outline in that introduction to the World Fantasy Convention.
Good point.
Yeah.
There's an outline that sets it up. There's
half the novel.
exactly,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So definitely a framework to get there and to get the book going. But wrapping it up will be, it's definitely not, though, as detailed as the outline that I had the benefit of working from previously. So that'll be an interesting experience. I intend to spend all of 2017 writing that, and then we'll be preparing that for publication in 2018. So that'll be the fourth book in Secrets of the Nine, Doc Caliban fighting the Nine.
Great. So I have one final question, and it's a bit of a what-if question. So leaving aside the books and the series we've talked about on this panel, if Mike was to turn up an initial chapter and an outline for one of Phil's other books that he was considering writing a sequel to, whether it be a book or a short story, and you were chosen to do it, what book would that be, and how might you see that going? I'm conscious we're probably getting close to running out of time, but let's see how far we can go through that. Danny, you want to start?
Sure. I don't know how many people may have seen the appendix in the new edition, or it's not exactly new now, but the latest edition of Time's Last Gift. But there is a chronology of what the main character did, or probably did, after he was in prehistoric Europe. And I think anything that Wold Newton has not filled in already from anything in that timeline, I would be happy to see.
That is brilliant. Yes, I agree. You can do that. Win.
Did we just have an offer and acceptance?
Provision.
I think that was a why not shrug.
Okay. I would do an imaginary manuscript that was discovered, a fifth Secrets of the Nine book centered around Lord Grunneth, and because Cleo, Jane, right, her fate is left unknown all the way back in the second book, and I'm sure that Lord Grunneth had some further adventures in his search for Cleo.
Yeah, that too. Chris.
This will probably come as no surprise, but as much as I like being able to work with this material and come up with my own storylines with the Ancient Opar series, Phil intended to take it. We do know where he was going to go after what is now Blood of Ancient Opar, who's going to write about Hadon's son, whose name is Kor, which is, it's not coincidental that the name of the lost city from H. Rider Haggard's novel She is Kor. So if any of that material, the outline to that novel about Hadon's son would turn up,
Yep,
that would be what I would do.
And for me, I've always had a soft spot for Lord Tiger, and I've loved the ending of Lord Tiger, where this, you know, this new Tarzan character who's grown up in the jungle, he's sitting on that plane, he's coming back to civilization, or coming to civilization for the first time, but he's not scared. He's looking forward to it. He knows there's going to be fun to be had in the city. He doesn't know what a city is, but he knows it's going to be interesting, and I'd love to explore what Lord Tiger would have done in New York or whatever big city. So that to me would be a fantastic sequel. But I think you guys have nailed it as well. So that's kind of the end of the panel. Can we take a couple of questions? Have we got a second? Yeah. So I don't know if there are. Is there anybody's got a question or two just in the dying minute? Yes, sir.
What caused Phil Farmer to just kind of let a story fizzle out? Like, using Pemberley House as an example, why did he just decide to stop it?
I think we don't know that for sure in some instances, but he had so many ideas.
Yeah.
He was an idea guy. He was an idea generator. And you should see his notes. I mean, there are boxes and boxes of paper that are just filled with his notes for story ideas, for characters, for chronologies. And my suspicion is that he started writing it, and for whatever reason, either had an epiphany and needed to start writing something else because that's where his creative energy took him, or maybe he had a publishing offer for a different series or a different book and had to go off and write that book, and for whatever reason he was so busy and had so many ideas, juggling them, that he never had time to come back to them.
And I probably answer fairly specifically with what the book that was going to be called Kwasin of Opar became the Song of Kwasin. He was actually contracted to write that novel and was intending to write it. A lot of bigger projects came down the pipes that he ended up writing. I believe that is probably what delayed him in writing it. And he got bogged down in certain projects. That his unpublished novel, Up from the Bottomless Pit, I think, was involved. He spent like a long time writing 2 different drafts of that novel, and the publisher was not pleased with it. He ended up writing Dark is the Sun as a replacement novel, which is that's one of his longest novels. So like that, I think, just derailed it. And as late as 1999, he was thinking about writing the 3rd book. And at that point, he was already retired. That's the year that The Dark Heart of Time came out. And that was right before he retired. So he was still thinking about it. We have a record. There's a book called Heritage of the Flaming God, edited by Burroughs fan Alan Hansen, that includes correspondence from him that he allowed to be published in that book, where he talks about it and discusses his desire to do it. Just whether it would happen or not, he was doubtful for various reasons, but that he was interested. So then his health eventually, the health downturn, and that was all over.
Just quickly, can we take that one question, and then anybody else can always just grab us at the table quickly?
Building on what you had just said, it seems like Burroughs fans, as well as the caretakers of Burroughs legacy, are probably much more receptive to Phil's work. I'm curious, when you do your Opar books, do you feel as much that you're trying to stay true to Phil, that you're also trying to stay true to Burroughs? And does that make it a bit more burdensome to try to juggle both legacies?
I wouldn't say it's a burden. I think I kind of revel in it. That's, it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's my 2 favorite writers, but it's something I do take into account, definitely. And I try to make it as consistent to Burroughs as possible, so that you could slot it in as the lost history of the city of Opar from Burroughs' Opar.
I think you do an excellent job with that, and, you know, I was just
So do
curious
I.
if that was something you were mindful of as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but we're around all weekend if you want any questions for the guys, and grab us tomorrow by all means, or later this evening. Thank you very much for your time. And